Hi friends, it's Rachel from Sugar Maple Farmhouse, and today I want to share with you how I made these darling woodland animal old world Christmas ornaments. Now these are all made from molds and oven baked clay, but each mold was a little bit of a different process, and as we go through them, I will explain the differences in each of the processes, and then I'll just let you watch as everything takes shape. I will also share which mold was my favorite to work with and why, and which I absolutely did not like working with and why too. Before we get started, if you could hit that subscribe button and follow along, I would love to have you here. I craft and DIY, cook and garden, and every now and then have general farm life updates too. Today's craft is an easy one that anyone can do, and while I worked on these over the course of a few days, you could certainly make all of these in one day. I really loved how these old world looking Christmas ornaments turned out, and I hope you do too. Before I kick off the craft, here is the supply list you need for the old world animal clay Christmas ornaments. Clay of your choice, oven baked or air dry. I use oven baked. Ornament molds, and these can be wood, ceramic, plastic, or metal. A work surface, and that could include parchment paper on a flat surface, a pottery ware board, or even just a clean countertop. Cornstarch, a stiff bristled paintbrush, a cutting tool, and I'll go more into what exactly that is in a minute, a baking sheet lined with parchment paper, hanging devices like picture frame hangers, which is what I used, ribbon and ornament hooks or ornament hooks, and you might need a rolling pin too. I'm going to start with the owl ornament. It is a wood ornament, which is the only wood one that I actually had. You need to start by putting cornstarch into the mold itself with a stiff brush. This is going to help the clay release from the mold. This is the one that I found you really do absolutely need to use the cornstarch for, whereas some of the others you didn't necessarily need it for. Once you have cornstarch in your mold, work with your clay and shape it into kind of the size of the mold. So you want to work with oven baked clay or air dry clay in your palms anyways to help soften it up. Specifically, oven baked clay comes out really hard, so you really do need to spend some time working with it in your hands just to soften it so you can mold it easier. In this case, I am using a brown clay, and I molded it to just about the size of my cookie cutter that I have here, and then I am pushing it into the mold itself. The process for making most of these is pretty much the same. The difference you're going to have when creating something like this is based on what your mold is made out of. So like I said in the beginning of the video, I will tell you which mold I liked working with best at the end of the video. However, it is a little different working with each type of mold, whether it's ceramic, plastic, or wood. I didn't have any metal, so those were the three I worked with. And each was a little bit different to work with just based on the give of the material. You can see here that getting the clay out of the wood mold was a bit of a challenge. The edges like to come off, so I just basically took them off. I did find this one to be the most difficult to get the clay out of, so again, that cornstarch you use in the beginning is really, really important. Also, what I'm doing here is I am making sure that I have the clay pressed down hard enough so that I get a good impression on the clay itself from the mold. Because the molds are so detailed, you really want to make sure you get all of those little details in your ornament. I did say the rolling pin was optional, but I do think if you have a lot of wood molds, you really may want to include it because I found it easier to use the rolling pin to get the back of this mold flatter than I did any of the other molds. The trick I found in working with the wood mold is to take all the excess clay off the sides and then work my fingers around the edge of the form and gently pull it out. If you get one side to release, the rest of it will easily pop out of the mold. Now, this is the cutting tool that I mentioned in the supply list. This is a pottery tool. I have it because I work on pottery. I'm a novice potter and I do make a lot of clay type things for the website. So I have a supply of them at home. You do not need this tool. I think if you had a knife, you could use a knife, but if you are using a knife, please be very careful with it. I think it would be probably a lot easier to cut yourself using that versus this tool. I will leave a link in the description below to where you can get just a small package of these tools if you do want to get them for this project or any other clay project. They really work well, and I think that they are kind of worth the money. They're not that expensive either. Next up is the squirrel ornament, and I made this with a ceramic mold. The moose ornament was made with the exact same type of mold, and they are very thin molds. So you can see them there on the left. They're very shallow. They are not like the owl at all, where I was able to really just press the clay into the ornament itself. Here I decided the best way to go about this would be to expand the clay to about the same size as the mold and then press it into the mold. I did go into this mold with some cornstarch. I really don't know if I needed it here, but it did kind of it gave a nice impression on the front of the mold where the cornstarch kind of hung around in the cracks. And so it allowed it to kind of have some depth to the ornament itself. In this case, I did decide to go in and push everything really well into that mold. This is actually the second squirrel mold that I made. The first one, I just didn't think it had enough of that detail. So in doing this the second time, I really went in and I really pressed everything in well. You can see again, some of that cornstarch didn't come out very well, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Once the squirrel popped out of the mold, it was very easy compared to the owl itself. Again, here I'm just using my cutting tool and going in and around the squirrel and cutting it out. It was actually one of the easier ornaments to cut out. It didn't have too many details. The moose was definitely the hardest, but the squirrel was somewhat easy and the cutting tool really helped here. I wanted to show you the moose mold too, even though it is also a ceramic shallow mold like the squirrel. The moose had a lot of appendages sticking off from the main body of the mold, like his legs and his antlers. And when I rolled out the clay, I just kept running into issues where one of those things would always be left out. So instead, I added on pieces once the clay was in the main body of the mold and then really pressed those pieces into the shape of the mousse. The problem with doing this is that you're risking some really weak points where you have the pieces of clay meeting one another if you really don't pack the clay into the mold. This was challenging for the shallow molds because they tended to pop in and out very easily. Now, the mousse mold was probably the most difficult mold for me to cut out because of the different appendages. They were all really thin and really delicate. So if you have a mold that is like this, it's important to take your time. I know that it looks like I'm speeding through these, but I sped these clips up by 300 to 400 times. Even still, I swear this project is something that will take you just a day if you were to work on it straight. If I had worked on it all day, I would have been able to finish these in a few hours, especially because I used oven baked clay, so they go into the oven for about 20 minutes to 30 minutes, and then you can move on with adding the picture hangers once they've cooled. The rabbit mold was made out of silicone and it was a very thin mold. And working with it was similar to working with the squirrel and the moose, but also a little different due to the material. I added cornstarch into the mold and then I started it the same way where I flattened out the clay and rolled out some of the clay and then really pushed it into the mold. I then added pieces of clay to make sure the rabbit was thick enough and really pushed those in there. I was worried about this one being a little thin because it's really a mold for chocolate, so I really just pushed as much clay into the mold as I felt like I could. And now here we are at my favorite mold to work with, the bird molds. These molds came with multiple birds on one mold sheet, so I really loved that. I liked these molds though for three reasons. One, the silicone proved to be very easy to work with. It was easy to press the clay into it, and then it was easy to pop the clay out of it. The second reason was because this mold is deeper. The ornaments themselves are weighty and they just didn't feel as fragile as the moose or the rabbit. The third reason is that I really appreciated all the details in this mold. It had a very similar look to the owl molds with the details, but it was much easier to use. These really have that old world Christmas ornament look to me, and I used terracotta clay on them and I thought they turned out just stunning. While I made these for Christmas, I could also see these being used as decor during gardening season or spring in some way too. Last but not least, we are at the dragonfly mold. I hated working with this mold and I really wish that were not the case. This is made with silicone too, and it is a nice deep mold like the bird mold. However, this is a mold for resin, and the silicone was just not stiff enough to withstand me pushing on the clay. The sides were giving way, and the first dragonfly that I made was wide, the detail was missing, and it was just misshapen. I tried again and pressed smaller pieces of clay into the mold, which is what you're seeing here, and I tried to hold the sides while I did so to keep it from warping. In the end though, it still warped a little on me and I could not get the antenna to stay on, so I just ended up removing them. I do love all the detail in this mold, and maybe if I made these a few more times, I would get the hang of the pressure that's needed to get the clay in there without warping it. However, if you decide to buy molds for this project, this is one that I would probably skip for this specific purpose. Because I didn't feel like I could press the clay into the mold very hard without warping it, I did end up going in with my cutting tool and taking some of the clay off the back that was lumpier so that the back would sit in a more smooth manner and look nicer. It's not like anybody sees the back, but it still was a little bit important to me to make the back not look all lumpy like you're seeing here right now. When all the ornaments are done, you want to bake them per the package directions. So if you are using air dry clay, just make sure you dry them per the package directions too. I used picture hangers to put on the backs of these. I didn't want to poke holes in them because I felt like they were too pretty to have holes. So I just glued various picture hangers to the backs of the molds once they were dry and hung them that way. At first, I had intended to hang them all with ribbon, but once I started hanging them on my tree, I did find that ribbon worked well in some instances, but in other instances, ornament hangers really just worked well too, and I attached them to the picture hanger on the back and was able to just hang them. I'd love to hear in the comments below which ornament ended up being your favorite. Mine are the owls and the birds, and I think that's just because the details in them really gave me that old world Christmas ornament feeling. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope that you love these woodland animal, old world Christmas ornaments, and that you have a Merry Christmas and/or Happy Holiday season. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comment section below and I will get back to you. Also, in the description below, there is a link to the full blog post with a step-by-step tutorial at sugarmaplefarmhouse.com. And there's also links to all the ornament molds I used on this project. Before you go, please hit that subscribe button. I would love to see you here again. Thank you so much, friends. Have a great day.